Welcome back. This is ITN. It's 1 o'clock.
A quick reminder of the main news so far. Kevin and Ian Maxwell have been charged with conspiracy to defraud. Their business colleague Larry Trachtenberg faces the same charge. Mr. Trachtenberg and Kevin Maxwell have also been accused of theft. All three were arrested in dawn raids. They are due to appear before magistrates later today.
More than 70 English soccer fans are still being held by Swedish police after further disturbances in Stockholm last night. The violence followed England's 2-1 defeat by Sweden, which means England are out of the European Soccer Championships. Several Tory MPs have demanded tougher action against football hooligans in the future.
At least 34 people have been killed in a squatter camp near Johannesburg. 200 men armed with guns and machetes rampaged through the settlement, attacking people at random.
And we return to Paul McCartney's 50th birthday and ask whether he's overrated or deserves all the acclaim. McCartney's not the only pop star of his age group to keep going. Tina Turner is 51, Mick Jagger, who's 48, and Rod Stewart, who's 47. They're all still performing. So is nostalgia now pop music's favourite pastime? To discuss that, I'm joined by the disc jockey David Jensen and the rock journalist Terry Staunton of the New Musical Express. David Jensen, if I can start with you. You've been following the charts for years. How do you rate Paul McCartney?
Very highly. He's a man of incredible talent. His repertoire is vast. His songs will be remembered in 50 years' time, maybe in 100 years' time, for a generation. He's written most of the soundtrack for people's lives. He's a very talented man, often maligned, and I think after the death of John Lennon, people were even crueler to him, saying that it was John Lennon who was the engine room in the Beatles and McCartney was just some kind of candy floss on top. But he's much more than that. He arrived at a period in pop music where it was almost unheard of for pop people to actually be pop personalities on television or on stage to be singing their own songs. Up to that point, you had songwriters that were employed by publishing houses or record companies that would deliver the goods to the stars at the time, Elvis Presley or whoever. But the Beatles arrived singing their own music, and this was actually something quite innovative in popular music, and he'll be remembered for that.
Terry Staunton, I'm wondering, he'll be remembered for that. Has there been anything since which quite rivals it? What's happened to the new industry?
Nothing has really rivaled it because the Beatles were such a huge phenomenon. It was a cultural thing as well as just music, what was happening in Britain and the world throughout the 60s. And as David says, they provided the perfect soundtrack for it. No one has really been that innovative or that enduring in their appeal since then, unfortunately. We try and find people who we think will be around in 50 years' time or who will still be making pop music at the age of 50. And the current crop, I don't really see that many.
Well, he does have his critics, like you said, saying he's candy floss. Why is that?
I don't know. I think maybe his baby face, perhaps, you know, and he was very much the pin-up of the Beatles, and maybe a few people didn't take him too seriously because of that. You were saying before about, are we wallowing in nostalgia? Well, he doesn't actually ever wallow in nostalgia.
No.
A lot of the young acts that you were talking about, that are coming through, they often wallow in sort of nostalgia that they weren't around for by recreating other people's songs, either sampling them or doing cover versions of old songs. And I think there is a concern that there, you know, where is the talent of tomorrow coming from? There's not a great groundswell of new writing talent.
I think it's interesting to note that in the late 70s, probably during the punk time in the early 80s, there was a noted backlash against the Beatles and McCartney as, you know, the face of safe corporate commercial pop music. But with the passing of time, a lot of bands from the late 80s onwards are name-checking Lennon, McCartney. They are covering their songs. It's just now that there's been a suitable period of time, it's not as if they're getting into their big brother's music. They're just rediscovering it for the first time. And there are bands now who will regard something like Eleanor Rigby or Paperback Writer as very much their music. They're hearing it for the first time. It's of 92 as much as it was of 66.
What about the man himself? I mean, he has a fairly unusual life for an incredibly rich pop star, doesn't he?
Yes, he leads a fairly quiet lifestyle. He's devoted to his family and to a large number of different pets and various causes of which he feels are important. He makes charitable donations, often in secret. He can do what he wants to do and disregard the rest. No, he, to quote somebody else's song, no, I think he really enjoys writing and performing, and that's why he'll continue to do so. And who are we to say he shouldn't? Because if he comes up with the kind of music he has entertained us with for all these years, then he should be, allowed to keep on doing it.
And yet many people say that since the Beatles, he really hasn't produced anything remotely of the same merit.
Well, it has to be said that there's been some pretty atrocious Paul McCartney records over the last few years. He did a version of Mary Had a Little Lamb, Mull of Kintyre. He did the soundtrack to a Rupert Bear cartoon. It's quite frightening, some of the awful stuff that he's come up with. However, his last album from about 2 years ago, Flowers in the Dirt, was regarded by many the best thing he'd done for like 10 to 15 years. He'd drafted in Elvis Costello as a writing partner, and that was quite possibly the most successful collaborative relationship he's had since John Lennon. The album sold fairly well. He followed it by a 12-month world tour, and it showed that, yes, he's still lean and hungry, and he's still trying. The results might not sell 2 to 3 million anymore, but he's still out there and he's still trying.
Would you agree that he's still out there and trying, or that he has produced some pretty atrocious stuff?
Well, I wouldn't agree with Terry about the atrocious stuff. I was never a great fan of Mary Had a Little Lamb anyway, but I like the frog chorus that Terry was talking about. He has had commercial failures. Give my regards to Broad Street was not the success he obviously hoped it would be. Neither was the Liverpool Oratorio of a couple of years ago, the collaboration with Carl Davis. But he actually has written in streams. He's written the ballads like Yesterday and Michelle, for which he'll be remembered, I guess, for all time. He's written the novelty songs. He's written wistful ballads like Another Day. So, I mean, there are many strings, to his piano.
I'm wondering from both of you what is your favourite McCartney song then, and how do you think he'll be remembered in 50 years' time?
Boy, I don't know. It's hard to say.
I would say on the song front, I would have to go back to the days of the Beatles, Paperback Writer, because everyone talks about how Sgt. Pepper, the album, was innovative, but Paperback Writer was very much a groundbreaking song. It was one of the first Beatles songs which wasn't about love. It was about a different subject matter which sort of broke the rules.
Right.
Final word?
Here, There and Everywhere was a favourite song of mine. He'll be remembered as a great balladeer.
As a balladeer. And was he unique in that?
Yes, in many ways he was. He's special. He created a sound that is distinctly McCartney. You can hear a McCartney song without him singing it, knowing that it's one of his songs, even if you haven't heard it before.
David Jensen, Terry Staunton, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I've been trying to think of a McCartney song about the weather. I'm afraid I've failed. Perhaps Martin Davis, waiting in the weather studio, has an idea.
I think you're just pretending to be too young to remember, Nick. How about Lucy in the Sky, or Sun King, or perhaps more obviously, Here Comes the Sun? I'm too young to remember as well, but Here Comes the Sun is track.